Okay, we're going to pull a cam bearing. Now you can see down this camshaft, we have a series of bearings, and they look like this guy here. Okay, we need to pull them out. They're in these bores. They can be very difficult to get to. Now before we pull them, something we should note is on this side here, right about here, we can see an oil hole. There might be another one here as well. You may have 2 or 3. I'll try to look. There's 2, one on either side. Have to make note of where they are. So just take a quick paint pen and mark these housings where they are. Before you pull them, you have to install them in the same configuration. Now to pull this guy out, we're going to use a special tool called a cam bearing remover and installer. Cam bearing installer and removal tool looks usually like this, comes in a kit. We have a few different parts. We have our puller, we have a bearing to take the load of that puller, and a pulling nut. We'll have a threaded screw rod here, which is going to do the pulling for us like a threaded puller. To pull the actual bearings, we're going to use a series of collars. And these collars here, you have to find the right size, and this would be the right size for what we're going to do. You can see they're held together with an O-ring, and they're expandable. These collars are going to fit onto this mandrel. They'll slide down into this hole, and the further we push them into that mandrel, because it's ramped, it will spread this collar apart further and further. The idea will be, we put this guy into that bearing. So this area will contact the inner race of the cam bearing. The lip on the edge will be what drives it out. Put it in, expand it till we have a snug fit, which ensures alignment, and then we'll drive it out. So we'll take a look over on the engine. So we'll take our expanding collar and we'll make sure this fits the inside diameter quite well. Okay, it's a nice loose fit. As we install it though, it's going to expand and grab that bearing and be able to drive it out quite nicely. To put this tool together, we take our mandrel on our threaded rod here, and we assemble it. On the back of this, we'll install a backup nut. This backup nut's going to come on just like this. And now nothing here has to be incredibly tight, okay? It just has to be snug. We'll slide this in the hole. It's still nice and loose. And then we'll start to turn this. And when we turn that backup nut, it'll expand that collar on the mandrel until it's snug. And now it's so snug, I can't even move it by hand. We'll move around to the top of the bottom of the engine, but from above, and look at how to actually pull this out. From above, what we have, here's our expanding collar. We also have a threaded rod, which is going to be the length of this engine. It's going to pass through all of the bearing journals, all the way to the outside. On the outside, we have our pulling plate, our bearing, our pulling nut. And what we'll do in this situation is this small nut that's exposed, we'll hold that with a wrench and we'll turn our pulling nut. That will pull the threaded rod in, removing our bearing. Now to pull this in, we have our 2 wrenches on. We're going to hold the rod steady and tighten this puller nut. Okay. And as we do that, the bearing should slowly pull out. So we're just going to move to the other side and watch that. We're slowly pulling this bearing. Okay, in real world, you'll probably want to do it a bit faster because somebody's paying you. But this is just for instruction. Keep hitting the camera stand, you'll have to forgive me. And you can see it's starting to pull it through now. Get that cam bearing out. And away we go. Maybe I'll make this part fast forwarded. There we go. Now that first bearing's out, you can slide this assembly off and take a look at it. We have our cam bearing out. We can take a look at it. We can see there's some damage to it. We've wore through that outer layer. Clearances might not have been what we wanted them to be. And here it is. Garbage. Now when you're installing a new cam bearing, you're going to take your mandrel and you're going to slip this right over the collet. Okay, now we can see this bearing is actually fairly loose on the collet itself. How far do you tighten it up? When we install this here, the bearing itself is going to get some crush and seal it in that bore. So if you make this nice and tight like we did when we pulled it out, it's going to crush and you'll never get your tool out. Then you're in for a bad day. Okay, so instead of that, what you can do is you can take a 6th thou feeler blade, about the amount of crush you're going to experience. If you can slide that in there, make it a little bit tighter, just a slight drag, that's very nice. That's the right size. So it is a bit loose, but you don't want it over tightened. Now to install it, we do the exact same thing we did before. We'll insert it in the hole, install the pulling nut, and pull it through.